Welcome to Intercultural Competence. I like to start here. The mindset for everything that we are doing within the core program is becoming a better care provider. Thank you for the humor. I appreciate that. So becoming a better care provider is really what we want to do as VA chaplains. Some of us have lots of years of experience. Some of us are brand new, but there's always room for growth. And so that's really where we're coming from with everything that we are doing with CORE, is how do we become better at what we do? And sometimes that includes taking an internal look at ourselves, at our biases, and how that may come into play in all the situations that we engage in. And so that's the mindset behind what we will be looking at. So this presentation is all about intercultural competence. This was originally part one of a 4-part curriculum that I was asked to design and help put together with Chaplain Roger Ward, who is one of the chaplains here at our facility and a participant in this call. And so what we're going to be looking at is diversity and inclusion and how we bridge the two. And so really the bridge between diversity and inclusion that we're going to talk about is our own development of intercultural competence. And a key piece of that as federal chaplains is developing interreligious competence. So how do we get here? Do you guys know what these things are that are on the screen?
So that's the Great Wall of China and looks like the Berlin Wall.
Okay. It is. It's the Great Wall of China, the Berlin Wall, and this is actually the Israeli West Bank barrier.
Oh.
And so, and yeah, feel free to comment, to type your comments and to reply, because I really do want this to be an open and engaging discussion. When we start putting up walls to separate ourselves out externally, we also begin to put up walls here within our hearts. And so the question is, why do we really build walls? A lot of it has to do with a lack of understanding of ourselves and others. Sometimes it's out of fear or hate, a need for safety or trust, to keep some people in and to keep other people out, to help us have a sense of power or control in a situation where we may not have experienced it before. Sometimes we don't even realize that we're building walls. It comes out of ignorance or naivete. That doesn't mean you're stupid for people that just took offense at the word ignorance. It just means you don't know. Sometimes we build walls because that we've learned that those walls are appropriate from other people, or we have acquired the walls of our family and friends. Why else might we build walls? Are there any other reasons? I like control. Self-preservation. Excellent. Fear of rejection. You are not. That's a great answer. Power. Our upbringing. Nice. Our traditions. Personal gain. Some of you have done your reading this week. I'm excited. Ooh, political neutral training was started by, nice. Thank you. Fear of loss and safety. Good. So, walls are not necessarily bad things, okay? Walls do serve a purpose. They do provide protection and defense, and they are boundaries, right? One of the things, if you've been through CPE, we learned that boundaries are important, and we learned that we have to respect boundaries. Sometimes we have to put up our own boundaries so that the others around us know that this is my space and my area, and these are the things that are important to me. And I would like for you to respect them. As the same way that we've tried to do that for other people. I'm going to respect your boundaries because I realize that these items are important to you, these beliefs, these values, something as simple as touch, right? There is a boundary there. And so walls do serve a purpose. But my question is, do we want to live with walls, especially walls around our heart? Because walls can be isolating. They can deter really true, authentic relationships with others. And they can keep us from working well with staff, patients, and their families. And thank you, Chaplain Tracy. We do have, there's all kinds of walls, right? And there are all kinds of boundaries. There are rigid ones, there are healthy ones, and there are poor ones. Ooh, I like railroad tracks too, right? Railroad tracks, they transport us from one place to another, but they also establish boundaries. So my question for you guys is, do you recognize the scene or this wall that's on the screen? Yes, from Home Improvement. Good. Okay. So Tim Allen was constantly in the series Home Improvement going out and meeting with his neighbor and seeking advice, right? But that fence became an icon for the boundaries that separate the two of them. It was a clearly established boundary. The two neighbors had a fondness for one another, but they also realized that even though they were in the same community, that they shared some similar experiences, that there was a separation between the two of them. And Chaplain Juliana Lesher will be coming in a few weeks to talk to us about clinical boundaries and how the clinical boundaries can often appear like this fence between Tim Allen and his neighbor. So my question for you is, how do we start removing or changing the walls in our hearts that separate us from one another? And yes, this is please jump in and share your ideas. Open communication, intentionality to being open and vulnerable, sensitivity to others, risk sharing ourselves, and authenticity. Nice. Intentionality, open communication. These are great. Examine why the wall is there in the first place. Reaching out of our own comfort zone, understanding. Beautiful. Willingness to understand each other, becoming aware of our own personal fears. Chaplain Bradley, I think you hit it. You all have given really well thought out answers. I think that's a real important one. Chaplain Thompson, being open to learning different cultural differences, I think is very true. No, yeah. Sorry.
I'll come look. Okay.
So I want you to look at this scenario real quick. I'm not sure why that is. Excuse me just a moment. All right. Dismiss. Yes. Okay, now we're back to where we should be. I want you to look at this scenario for just a moment. You are part of a new hospital committee tasked with picking the latest project for the Preventative Ethics Committee to work on. There are a mix of departments, clinicians, and support personnel. The team has been reading over proposals for 3 weeks, trying to narrow the field of prospects. In the middle of the latest meeting, a physician stands up and yells, "If you would just listen to me, we would be done by now." And he leaves, slamming the door. What happened? Does anybody have a guess? His wall went up pretty quickly. All right. Someone felt like they weren't being heard. Excellent. He didn't get enough sleep. Amen. He didn't. These are all great. Frustration. Excellent. He was failing to get his point across for his purpose. He felt unappreciated. He has not listened to the others. Someone else felt like they weren't being heard. There was an emotional trigger. What's the point? Exactly. Somebody didn't value the input of everyone involved. So that's exactly what happens. Often we'll be in the middle of a situation. This is my point, Chaplain Maddox, and we won't know what in the world happened. Right? We're sitting there, we're focused on the task at hand. We're with an interdisciplinary team, and then something strange and unusual happens, like somebody explodes and leads. And so the question is, what do we do? Can we stop for a moment and go check it out? Can we look at all of the factors that may have come into play that led up to the situation? And some of you are hinting all around it. Sometimes I know I have been triggered in a meeting and become very uncomfortable, and I've had to step out. And so it takes some ownership of ourselves and some self-awareness to be able to look at what may be going on. And so that's why the question, what happened, is there, because often I've sat in meetings and something happened and we're all like, we all have this clueless look like, do you know what happened? Do you know what happened? What happened to the other person? Often my trigger that I have to monitor, Chaplain Andrews, is not feeling like I am heard. And so I have to acknowledge that, and I have to work on it. And one of the ways that I work on it is also being aware of others at the table and creating a space so that other people at the table can also be heard, because that's important to me. I have felt voiceless and powerless before. And so my reaction is I go out of my way to make other people also have the opportunity to voice what is on their minds. All right, so we're going to come back to that scenario, but I want to throw out just some basic information. The concept that we're working with, all right, if you've got to go. We're going to record this, but thank you for coming and being with us as long as you possibly could, because we know that happens. Chaplain Zachary, thank you for coming. And thank you for agreeing to be a mentor. You are fabulous. Diversity is simply the mixture of group differences in a group. When we break it down to its core, that is what it is. And so when I like to think of diversity, a great metaphor for it is food. I want food that is complex and that is filled with flavor. And so when there are very little differences in the elements that I put together to create something to eat for dinner, there is a very, very bland food. It's edible, but honestly, if it's bland, I'm not going to drive across town to eat it, and I'm probably not going to pay money to eat it. And so I look at life the same way. We want life and relationships that are rich and complex normally, that are engaging and inviting. And so the differences that we find in individuals can lead to rich and complex relationships. So here's my example, since I like food. What do you get when you go into a kitchen and you have kohlrabi and blueberries and black pepper and olive oil and orange juice and dandelions, spinach, radicchio, and honey? Does it sound like anything anybody would want to eat? A stomach ache. That was awesome. A smoothie. Okay. All right. So some people are looking at the ingredients and they're like, oh no, this sounds terrible and horrible. But, oh, I love it. Dandelion tea is quite tasty. I agree. Excellent, Florine. When I look at it, I see a salad. Each item has unique flavor and texture and purpose. And so, depending on how I acknowledge those differences in flavor and texture and how I mix them together, I can create something that can be quite tasty. So, a smoothie would be great, a salad would be great. I'm not sure where you would get chicken fried steak, but you know, it would be a great compliment on the side of my salad, Chaplain Ward. I understand. Where's the chicken? So this is just an example. I'm a vegetarian because I'm allergic to meat, so that's why there is no meat in my kitchen. I am very sorry. But next time I will come prepared with chicken and chicken fried steak. So I want to go back to our scenario where the gentleman exploded. All right. So we're working on a hospital committee that's new. We're working on picking a project for the preventative ethics committee to work on. So preventative ethics, they're not the ones that they are the ones that look at a situation and then they work backwards to try to figure out how we prevent something from happening and putting policies and procedures and measures in place. That was actually a committee that I got to work on as a CPE resident. And so it was awesome because I was working with individuals that were from the PINTAD all the way down to individuals that were part of environmental services. And so there was quite a difference in the people that were there. And so you have all different professions sitting around at one table trying to figure out what project they're going to choose next, what would be most beneficial, what would be the most time efficient. And it looks like in the middle of the meeting, our physician got really upset. So my question for you is, what are some of the differences that may have shown up and contributed to the complexity of the situation? So many different views, right? Thank you. There were some definite educational differences. There are different cultural norms and perspectives. Good. Different professionals, different departments. Green chili is like duct tape. I love you guys. Right, so very different priorities because they're from different disciplines. Different power dynamics, right? So you've got someone that's used to giving commands to someone that's used to, or issuing orders to someone that's used to taking orders, and now they're on equal footing, right? So what kind of conflict can be created in there? There are different areas of vested interest. Expectations of something new. Anytime that you are involved in something that is new and unknown, there is going to be additional stress, right? And sometimes it's good stress, it's you stress, sometimes it's not such good stress. But there's always anxiety with change and with taking on new adventures. Have any of you experienced that with CORE? Thank you for your honesty. All right, so I say that because you're not alone. Some of you are building up to the anxiety and the stress. Okay, well, thank you for your honesty too, Chaplain Andrews. So where do we go from there? Some people believe that just by increasing the number of differences in a group, that is a solution to all of life's problems. You just throw a whole bunch of people together and they'll either work it out or they won't, and life will be great. But even in our scenario where we have individuals that have a common purpose and mission, the differences can make problems with communication and increase conflict and stress. And so instead of looking at diversity as the goal, right, we do want to acknowledge, we do want to increase the differences because they create such richness in life. But we really want to move towards inclusion. So inclusion is when all of the ingredients work together, utilizing what makes them unique, where they feel fully embraced, fully valued, and you're able to use your differences and all of your experience as part of your gifts. So I offer this example. I was in a group that was very, very diverse. We had a mixture of faith traditions as well as a mixture of racial ethnicities. We had some people that had been military and some people that hadn't. And so it created a great place for feedback. It was a great microcosm of the world. But what happened was in the process, some people did not feel that what they had to share was valued. And so they felt like they had to hide parts of themselves because they wouldn't be recognized or they wouldn't be appreciated. And so it created some increased tension. And so inclusion would, for that group, would have been not only being able to share some of those differences without fear of rejection or fear of guilt or shame, but instead also being able, not just acknowledging them, but to be able to live them out and not have to hide parts of ourselves in community. And so how do we move from diversity to inclusion where we feel fully embraced and valued and all of who we are is seen as a gift? That would be intercultural competence. So how do we get to intercultural competence? It begins by things as simple as identifying your own cultural influences, recognizing what makes you both the same and different as the others that you encounter, reconsidering your perceptions and thoughts about yourself and others, and then one additional move, and this really shows that we are actively moving towards inclusion, and that's being willing to change your actions and choices to show all people that they are valued. And that one's a big learning curve for a lot of people. I like some of these comments. Yeah, oh, you guys are fat. I'm enjoying this. So what I would like to do for just a second is to look at what culture is. If you've been doing the readings ahead of time, wonderful. You should have a really good foundation on all of this, but some of us didn't get to it yet. So I want to start with cake since I am a foodie. Culture is like cake. There are parts of it that are easily observed, like music and clothing and food, games, sports, stories, language, things that we share and talk about around the water cooler or the coffee pot in the mornings. And those are objective because I can see them, they're on the outside, they're objective. But culture also has parts that aren't easily seen, right? And these are subjective. So like the interior of a cake, which is just as delicious and can be just as beautiful or even more so to look at, these differences are really key in intercultural engagements. So some of them are like our differences in beliefs, our differences in values, our perceptions, and that includes our biases, right? Our points of view and our biases often come into play. We're not so honest about those at times. It also includes our societal roles and expectations. So where can your culture come from? I post this list and I want you to look through it. And if there are others that you would like to add, feel free to speak them out or to put them in the box. I consider culture from a very wide perspective. So culture can come from who you grew up with, who raised you, who you hung out with, where you went to school, your geographic location, where you live, as well as the neighborhood in which you live. Those can be two very different things. What job you do or what positions you have held, where you work, the time period in which you live, where you may go to worship or how you worship. So specific churches or temples or mosque, or my mind just went blank. Sorry about that. It can also come from travel experiences. Where else might, I like these. Who you marry. Somebody's already looked at the next slide. The things that you do. Oh, good. So I agree with you, Chaplain Kopak, because the next thing I was going to say is our culture also comes from external messages, what media that you are exposed to. So what I'd like for you to do is to take an image at this, look at this picture. And so what are some of the things that come to mind when you look at it? What messages are you getting from this one picture of Times Square? Lots of energy, lots of advertisements, materialism, confusion, Toy Story, stuff, busyness. You're exactly right. So, when I look at it, I'm immediately thinking I'm thirsty. I need to grab something to drink, probably a Coke, maybe a Pepsi. I'm instantly checking my phone because there's LG on the screen. There's chock full of nuts, so I'm thinking, I wonder when I'm gonna get my next cup of coffee. So there's all kinds of messages that we get these things. That's right. There are so many subliminal messages that are here. Life in the fast lane. All of this just from one picture. So what I would like to do is I would like to challenge you for just a minute. And I'll even put on a timer because, I feel persnickety today. So I'm going to give you 90 seconds to write down 5 to 10 things that make up your cultural identity. So doesn't have to be hard. Because while I'm giving you 90 seconds, I'm also going to share with you mine, so give you some brainstorming, brain food. All right, go. So my example, these are my cultural identity and influences. I came from a military family. I was born in Hawaii. I learned the values of education, family, and loyalty. And of course, since my dad was a Coast Guardsman, Semper Paratus, always be ready. I was a Girl Scout, and I was in the Civil Air Patrol. So I had a lot of military influence and structure, and I was all about learning and achieving. I was a big part of the Cherokee Cultural Society in Houston. I was a board member as well as the president. I am a Cherokee stomp dancer. That is not the social dancing. That's actually the religious aspects of it. And I'll be happy to give you more information about that offline. I practice Native American traditional beliefs. My husband is a member of the Cherokee Nation, and so are my daughters and my grandson. But I also am a Christian, and so part of my spiritual journey and my cultural identity is learning about both of those and how they can coexist. I am in my family. I am a daughter, a mother, and a grandmother. I was a musician, or am a musician. I am both a band nerd and a choir geek. And if you ask me my favorite music, it is probably blues, and I love Sarah Vaughan. I've been a florist, a teacher, a pastor, and a chaplain, and now I am here talking to you guys. So that was my 90 seconds of cultural identity. I'd love for you to hop on the line if you want to and share some of yours, or if you've already chatted them in, typed them in the chat box, I would be more than happy to read them. Would anybody like to jump on and share theirs real quick?
Sure.
Yeah, this is Chaplain Richard from New York. I wrote that Catholic, Hispanic, American, comes from a musical family, opera. My father loves opera, priest, Capuchin Franciscan. That's all I can think right now.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Anyone else?
Sure. This is Patrice from, I'm in Oregon. So I'm from the South. And so hospitality was a big thing, friendliness to others, Cajun food, of course, and that's what brought our families and friends together as food. Feminine, hardworking parents, so hardworking children. New Orleans Saints fan, so football was a big thing in our home. And I come from a long line of strong women, having even a great aunt that was in World War I, that was a nurse. Yeah. So, yeah.
Thank you, Patrice. I appreciate it. Chaplain Ward said African American male. Chaplain Sherry Heaton said from the inner city. Chaplain Jesse Stewart said born in Ohio and I grew up in multiple places. Chaplain Joyce Burt said African American. Chaplain Woods, white male working class roots, first generation college student, athlete, and Catholic. Chaplain Cotton said foreign born, traveler, military, big family, youngest member. Ooh. Chaplain Stewart, European American. Wow. Chaplain Ward, did you want to say yours? Because yours is quite lengthy. No, I can't hear you. Do you want me just to read it out?
Can you hear me now?
I can. Go ahead.
Well, culture to me also includes where you're from. I'm from Texas, which is really the Southwest, but it's still a part of the South. I was born and raised in a segregated hospital in the thick of the civil rights movement. So my parents, my dad was an attorney, mom was a registered nurse, were sticklers for academic and professional attainment, which is wonderful, although it doesn't tell you how to get along with people. And so that middle class identity, myself and my two sisters, we bought into that as an avenue of how we were supposed to live. We were raised with home training, which simply means for a kid that you want to be invited back again. My parents came out of the Baptist church, and so when we came along, we were born and raised in the Episcopal church because they wanted to get out of that culture where you went to church at 10 o'clock and came out at 3 o'clock. So from that, I'm quite acclimated to going to church for no more than about an hour. And so these are the kinds of things that helped, that contributed to the culture that I grew up in.
Thank you, Chaplain Ward. I've enjoyed reading through all of these. Somebody was a Star Wars and Star Trek fan. And let me tell you, I'm right there with you. In our house, you're either one or the other. I'm like, nah, you got to be both. There is no separating the two sci-fi genres, but that's my biases. Oh, some of these are excellent. And thank you. Somebody brought up some real key words, and so I am going to throw them out because I believe that they're very beautiful parts of our culture and our cultural identity. So someone brought up their gender orientation. No, their gender identity and their sexual orientation. I get words confused a lot, so you'll have to excuse me because I'm still learning too. But I thought that was beautiful, that was a part of how they understood their culture, and it is a very big part of culture. Someone, I love this. I'm a Northerner, born and raised in New York. I'm an African-American female, a descendant of slaves, a civil rights advocate. I'm justice-focused and ordained minister. I love it. And Amanda, I love yours as well. I am white, gay, raised in the suburbs of a big city. I'm educated. I'm seen as able-bodied, cisgendered, Chaplain, and white. I think those are wonderful. So thank you guys. I also see a scuba diver and a baseball fanatic. Do we have anybody that was watching? It's not baseball, but did anybody see the end of the NCAA championship? My husband was rooting for Texas Tech, and I was rooting for Virginia. So even there, we had some differences in our house. Aww. It ended up being a pretty interesting game.
5 hours a week for what? 12 weeks or something?
So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to ask if you have your mic on and somebody else comes into your office and asks you a question, please mute your mic because you may or may not say something that will be overheard that you may not appreciate being overheard later. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over to this short video because it's a funny take on some of the differences that language and culture can play together.
You gotta put her on. You gotta put.
There's no noise.
Okay, thank you. All right, let me see if I can get it going.
Good morning, America.
All right, let me try one more time. I will try one more time, and if it doesn't work, we may have to skip it, which is really sad. Maybe we'll try one more time and see if that helps as well. Can you hear? Nope.
Not right now. No, not yet.
Get it again.
Still not able to hear?
No.
Okay.
It's not that.
The movie's slow too.
Okay, so I will send this link out. So this was on CBS Sunday Morning, and it's a really good play that shows the differences between both English and American culture. So for lack of a better term, for all the white folk out there that think all the white folk across the world are the same, this just demonstrates that there are a lot more that comes into play in our cultural identity than just the color of our skin. And so I'll send that link out so that you can watch it. But that also means that we may not be able to see the other movie link that I had for us. So when it comes to it, I will email that one out as well. So where do we get stuck? In cognitive processing therapy and in acceptance commitment therapy, we often talk about our stuck points. Joseph Campbell talks about the second threshold, the barrier that keeps us from moving forward. And so when we think about moving from diversity to inclusion and intercultural competence, what are some of the things that become stuck points for us? It can be simple things like understanding what culture is. It can be something as simple as understanding what diversity is. Once we begin to understand the impact of diversity and grow in our understanding of culture and cultural differences, those stuck points can change. Sometimes where we become stuck is our point of view, and that is what we're going to talk about next. Our point of view can be something that has been learned, that we've taken on from others. It can be our personal biases. Thank you, all of you that are sharing the links. I appreciate that. Also, language can be a big stickler. So if you are coming from one tradition, one culture that speaks one language, and you're moving into another area where they speak a completely different language or a different dialect, or their humor is different, then just a change in verbiage, right? The use of words can make a huge difference in how that we relate to one another, and can cause some significant problems that lead to conflict and increased stress. So when I talk about points of view, I would love to hear, have you ever heard anybody say, this has nothing to do with culture? Whatever is going on has nothing to do with culture. Okay. What about my blank culture is better than yours, or the opposite, their blank culture is better than mine? Okay. How about this one? I see no culture, or I see no color. Everything is beautiful and the same. Okay. All right. Or how about I have no culture? So I bring these up because these are all different points of view that we have that are expressed all the time that impact our ability to move from diversity to inclusion. So when you hear somebody say this has nothing to do with culture, often they're coming from a point of view of denial. They really don't see, or they are denying that culture can make an impact in a situation. When we compare parts of our culture to another, we are actually judging them, right? Whether we're judging them as better than ours or us better than them, anytime we come to a place of judging, it can lead to some conflict, right? It can lead to the dehumanization of another person. It can lead to the oppression of another person. The statement, I see no culture or color, often where I used it way back in the day before I understood all of its ramifications is because I meant that I found all cultures beautiful, and I could not see where there was a conflict. I learned, though, through a lot of hard work and some heavy conversations with my colleagues, that when I say that, or when I said that I was actually downplaying the differences that the beauty and the richness had to offer. And so it took me a lot of work to unlearn that language and to be able to phrase what I meant in a different way. The last statement, I have no culture, really is a point of view of disconnect. And so that's the last one that we're going to talk about today. But this is one that I hear a lot in talking with veterans. They've become very disconnected from themselves, from a community, from everybody, become disconnected from their higher power. And so that's something that when we think moving forward, as we think about mental health, as we think about suicide, as we think about our interventions with veterans, that's something that we really have to pay attention to, because if they're saying I have no culture, they may also be saying I am disconnected from any kind of community and support. And so part of our jobs as chaplains is to start listening better, so that we can engage in deep conversations about what that might look like. Oh, I'm enjoying all these comments. Thank you. I don't see black or white ribs. I see yummy rib sauce. Barbershop. Yes. Probably the best line of the day. Everything is beautiful in its own way. It wasn't Ray Stevens, but it was Ray Charles. Well, Ray Stevens may have sang it too, but the one that I remember is Ray Charles. Achieving a meta level above culture. Nice. I see colors, but with appreciation. That is beautiful. Oftentimes, thoughts can be communicated by our actions or interactions. You are so true. So moving forward, one of the things in trying to move from diversity to inclusion, and we read about it in the article on acculturation, was focusing on similarities. Is that going to be the answer for us? And so if you haven't seen the movie The Giver yet, it came out in 2014. I highly suggest that you watch it. We will try playing the link, but I have a feeling that you're not going to be able to hear the sound for it either. It was a good movie. Thank you, Jesse. All right, can you hear the sound?
No, I can't.
All right, then I will just stop it. So I will send you the link to that one as well. So in the movie The Giver, society has moved forward and they have decided that the best way for everyone to survive is by everybody becoming the same. So they take away all differences, they take away all emotion, you have the same process for everything, and society functions well. And when you do not meet a certain, when you are not able to be the same as everybody else, then you will get some kind of counseling or re-education, or you are eliminated because you do not fit in the box. And so the gift of the giver was an individual that knew the history of the people. And so he was responsible for carrying the history of the people, and he was the one that the officials in charge went to for mediation and for answers about how to proceed forward in situations. And so if you haven't watched The Giver yet, I highly encourage it. There are clips of it on the YouTube that give a great exposure. I think it's also available as either Netflix or Hulu. But the reason why I wanted to bring forward the idea of focusing on similarities, because one of two situations happens when we focus on similarities. We minimize others. And so one way we do it is through overemphasizing human similarities as a way to bridge the gap between cultures. So because we all have motivations and attitudes, we have basic human needs, because we are all human beings, because we may love our families, these are all similarities that all humans experience. And so if we all focus on them, we will just be fine and we all can get along. The problem is, while these are all shared similarities in the human experience, when we focus simply on the fact that they are similar, we tend to ignore how these can be different for each person and how these differences can add to a deeper understanding for us about what really motivates me and how your motivations are different than mine. How while you may love your family, I have a complex, diverse family, and there are some individuals that I'm okay with, and then there are some individuals that I have to set up really strong, healthy boundaries with. And so when we minimize those differences, then we really do lose a lot. The other way that we also minimize is by focusing on universal principles, values, and abstract concepts as a way of moving from diversity to inclusion. So since we all believe in human rights, since we all believe in respect, since in America we all believe in democracy or in capitalism or spirituality, we should all be able to get along. And we'll focus on these things and everybody should be fine. But when we focus only on how they are similar, we lose the richness of the different perspectives. Your principles are different than mine. You've had a different life journey. You're from a different area of the globe. And so the values of the people there and the traditions that are there, they can feed and add to and enrich my understanding and my experience of life. So when we minimize, we lose those differences. That's the one thing I want you to take away from this. When we don't see color anymore, when everybody is the same color, then we lose the richness of the different perspectives and different experiences that people have to offer. Ah, very good, Chaplain Cotton. Problem is that dominant culture often will absorb minority opinions. Thank you. That is one of the problems that we have. And so what do we do with that? Do we just absorb it? Do we recognize that where it comes from and the richness that it has to add to it? Or do we, I believe in acculturation, in the acculturation article, it talks about we are a melting pot. Well, when we melt everything together and we don't recognize where those ideas and principles and differences come from, then we lose a lot too, right? And we lose the history behind it and why it was important. I love this. Telling someone you don't see their color can be offensive. Exactly. I agree. And so that's the whole point, right? If I don't see what makes you different from me, right, then I'm also diminishing who you are. So why am I telling you all of this? Why have we been focusing on all of this? Because culture really does affect every area of our lives, including how we communicate, how we convey or express what we are thinking and feeling, as well as how we engage in and work to resolve situations. Why is that important? Does anybody know why it might be important to know that culture affects how we communicate as well as how we engage in conflict? And by the way, while we're pondering that for just a second, I just want to mention, I love these comments. Chaplain Prentice offered, I disagree with the majority absorbing the minority. I believe that is true. Because in my experience, I see that idea is less than true. Thank you for your honesty. Roger Ward. I feel patriotism can also be a place for racism to hide, such as with the Copernic issue. These are very good points. Absorption, assimilation. Somebody read the acculturation article. Thank you. Because when we work with people that come from different cultures and who deal with conflict differently, exactly.
Kristen,
Yeah.
This is Chaplain Cotton. I think in the reading, what it was saying is that we look for similarities in these minority opinions, and so what we do is the dominant culture absorbs those opinions in such a way where it says, yes, they're like us, and then sort of rephrases it, but it doesn't give them their distinctiveness, robs them of their distinctiveness. I think that's a point the author was trying to make.
That was one of the points he was trying to make. And so what do we do with that? And so when we are part of the dominant culture, then it is important for us to recognize that and to give voice to that. When we know the history, we need to point people back to the history, to the foundations of where those ideas and differences come from, so that no one becomes a minority. Instead, what it does is it empowers and it lifts individuals up and gives them a voice and a seat at the table where they may not have had that seat at the table before, because somebody else who was of the dominant culture chose to take that seat away from them. So whether or not you agree with that last statement, we're going to move forward. And we'll just leave that as food for thought for a minute. So when we don't understand the importance of our cultural differences and similarities, including the differences in how we talk, the difference in how we express ourselves and our emotions, the differences in our perspectives, we end up in uncomfortable, complex misunderstandings, perpetuate fear, hurt, anxiety, violence, and more. So I want to go back to our scenario with the physician, because you are well-informed, well-educated chaplains. You go to visit the physician following the preventative ethics meeting. He is in the same-day clinic for mental health, and he is in charge of several medical students which have just started a new clinical rotation. While talking, the physician shares he is from Colombia and has been working in mental health for 20 years. His regular psychiatric visits have a 3-month average wait list, and he developed the same-day clinic to help triage crisis and prevent recurrent hospitalizations. And he says, I am a doctor. We prevent things from happening all the time. It's what we do. Why would a committee for preventing not listen to the experts? So my question for you is, now that we've learned a little bit more about culture, cultural differences, different understandings of culture, what are some of the cultural things that have come into play for this physician?
He might feel that because he's from another country, he's not being listened to, and that might be what's bringing some of his anger out too. So
very
they might also do things differently in Colombia or Latin America, and maybe he feels he's not being heard. So that could be why he's also angry.
Very much so, right? He's got all this experience, but because he's not from, this country, he may feel oppressed, right? Because he is in a minority. I love that.
But he may also feel as if, being the doctor, that he is the authority, the ultimate go-to when it comes to treatment for mental health patients. What he doesn't understand is that, he doesn't work in a vacuum. He works as a member of a team, and there are other folks working with him and working with these mental health patients. He's not the only person on the front line. So the experiences he may encounter may be different from the experiences the chaplain may encounter. However, he's seeing himself as the spokesperson, and he's not the spokesperson. He's one voice amongst many on that mental health team.
I love it. And I believe some of your other colleagues have agreed with you. It's not about the physician, it's about the patient. And some people have seen, he sees himself as the expert, right? But there are other people that work with patients, like the nurses, that have valuable information to add to the situation that he may be dismissing as well, right? Because he has been dismissed, he may not even realize that he is being dismissive of others. I love this. The experts do not know everything. Thank you, Florine. In some cultures, a doctor is next to a god. And so if he's coming from a culture where that is the example, and he's expecting to be respected and treated in such a way, not to have that, right, can create some dilemmas, that can create some inner conflict for himself, as well as some pretty heated conversations at the table. If I have missed one of your comments, it's not because I intended to, but it's because you guys are fabulous at adding this stuff in. So what I would like to do for a few minutes is I want to talk to you about your own communication, cultural communication, and conflict differences. So grab a sheet of paper, and you're welcome to write your answers down for yourself just to see where you are. So sometimes when we are communicating with one another, we have a preference or a style in which we operate. We may be more direct in how we communicate, or we may be more indirect. Sometimes this comes from how we learn to function in a system. Sometimes it's just because I grew up, you go to the person and you tell them what you think. And so sometimes it becomes from our family, right? And so just for a few moments, I want you to think about your own preference and style. So when you have a problem, what do? Do you, number one, speak directly to the person involved, Or 2, go to someone else and have them speak on your behalf? Depends on the subject and context. I agree. All right. Speak directly, both. Okay. All right, next question. When speaking to someone, do you talk about the situation you're addressing, or do you 2? So 1 is talk about the situation you are talking about, or 2, do you talk around the situation? Oh, I like this. I may talk to the person, but I may not speak directly about it. This is good. We have quite a good book. Talk about it, but gently. Nice. Both in different situations. Be mindful of respect. Good. Okay. Speak directly to the issue, then incorporate the big picture and how our issues fit in. Nice. Okay. So when you are asked a question, so when somebody asks you a question, do you 1, answer the question immediately, or 2, talk about the question and then eventually get to an answer? Both. Right? It depends on if you're in an interview. Pray and then respond. I thought you'd like that. Okay, depends on the situation. Seek first to understand and then be understood. Depends on the context. Think thrice before I speak once. Okay. All right. So some of those are pretty easy to answer. Some of them are not. So now I want you to think. I want you to get really in touch with your heart and with your gut. And I don't want you to answer from your head. I really want you to answer from whatever your first instinct is when you hear the question. Okay? Because I know we are all professional chaplains and we all know how to talk around an answer to what we think would be the appropriate response. But now I want you to do some personal reflection with the next couple. Okay? These are all have to do with styles of emotional expression. So when you are feeling frustrated, do you 1, share it openly with others, or 2, restrain yourself and appear calm? Okay, so some of us try to restrain and to appear calm, take a deep breath. Others are like, listen, I share openly and it's okay. Good. Okay, next question. When feeling bored during a meeting, do you try to appear engaged and listening? That's 1. Or 2, roll your eyes, stretch, and secretly start watching videos or sending text. And be honest. I'm glad some of you saw the humor in this. Yes. So some of you try to do all of the above. Yes, this is a confession button. It's okay. Thank you, Florine. I used to page myself to get out of meetings. I love it. So it really depends on the conversation, right? Sometimes in this situation, it depends on the relationship that you have with the presenter and if you feel value in the group that you are with. So if some of you have been rolling your eyes and stretching and secretly texting or watching videos during this presentation, I completely get it. It's all right. So last one. When you walk into a room with a grieving family, do you, 1, look for the most functional individual and engage them in conversation? Or 2, look for the individual that looks emotional and engage them in conversation? Both. Okay. So remember, gut instinct. What's your first thing when you walk into a room? Look for the hurting. Ah, I'm with you, Florine. That, I will admit, that's my go-to. I usually look for the most functional and then go from there. And so what the reason why I offer these is it invites us to really think about if in our small group we have this many differences and preferences, right? And how we prefer to engage others in conversation and conflict, or how we prefer to, or not prefer to, how we express ourselves instinctively with emotion, then, or how comfortable we feel with emotion, then the staff members, the patients that we care for and their families, they're also going to be just as varied, right? And so to become more aware of that. So what I would like to do is I would like to go back to this idea of cultural disengagement. Many of the veterans that I've encountered feel a cultural disengagement, meaning they feel like an outsider. They have difficulty being in a community or group. They feel rejected by their group or by another group. And this last one, I have to admit, I see a lot. They feel very comfortable being contrary. So as you think about the veterans and the staff that you engage in, what challenges might cultural disengagement create for healing? What spiritual injuries may you have to think about addressing? What core needs do they have that you might want to work on? What obstacles are they going to face moving forward? Anybody can jump in with a comment or type it in. I'm good either way, because this is our last slide. Connectedness. Integration. They will isolate, right? They already know how to isolate, so they'll do it. And so if they're isolating, where might we, what might this mean, right? Do they have systems of community and support? Trust issues, avoidance, rejection. Oh, huge walls. You can talk to them about their fear. Sometimes disengagement is a barrier. You're right, Chaplain Jennings. And so it takes a while to build that relationship, especially with somebody that doesn't want a relationship, right? Or doesn't feel safe in a relationship, to be able to begin that communication. They will need to address forgiveness. Patience is so important. You're exactly right. And so what I would like for you to think about as you move throughout your context this week and moving into next week, I would really like for you to look for issues and places where culture, whether it's cultural disengagement, or if there are other places that you notice culture coming into play, pay attention to them and see if there's an opportunity for learning for yourself or for another, and how you might go about that. This week's reflection paper, if you haven't done it yet, these are the 4 questions that I ask, and there will be similar questions for every module. They should be posted at the beginning of the week, and following the video didactic, we would like for you to really address them and work on them. So for this week, first one we've already talked about a little bit. So what is your understanding of your cultural identity and what informs it? Number 2, how do you understand your biases may impact your work as a chaplain? What are your biases? You know, sometimes we may not understand. For me, it was understanding my own whiteness and becoming more aware of it, and how I could educate myself about it, and then educate others, right? And the importance of it. How do you intend to grow your knowledge of other cultures and practice of intercultural competence? So each week you'll be asked to look at how do you want to address growing in this area. So if you would like, I have information on taking an intercultural development inventory to see where you are and creating a growth plan from it. I also have information on an intercultural conflict style inventory. There are great trainings and books and events that are available. They're out there. So what do you want to do to grow your knowledge of intercultural competence and your practice of it? And then the fourth question for you to answer this week is briefly share a case example where you observed cultural differences at play in communication or conflict. So what's the problem? Where were they involved? And what are the differences? How did it resolve? So I thank you guys for hanging out today. You guys had lots of information and questions. Chaplain Cassie and I will be around if you would like to shoot us a message or an email or a phone call. Does anybody have any questions? You're welcome to stay on the line if you would like to ask them. If not, we'll see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.